Hello and welcome. This is VK4 Bravo Delta Echo. Looking at doing the Shari Pi construction. This is the video 1 in a 3-part series where I'll be first one will be obviously the construction. The second one will actually be the software using Hamvoip Allstar, and then the third one which will be digging deeper into the software and possibly with DMR, etc. and whatnot. And yeah, so this is the first video, so welcome. Obviously this is the manual, which you can download from either through the website or you can actually go to the groups, groups.io/Shari, out of the files section. It's a lot of information in there that you can download for all their stuff, whether it be the Shari Pi 3U or 3V or the Shari PiHat U. I've actually got the Shari PiHat V for the VHF side of things. So, but yeah, so, and obviously the gear that you'll need is obviously in here as well. But I've basically got it all here. This is basically what you get in the kit, which is the Argon Neo case for the Raspberry Pi 4, and that's basically it there. And as you can see, all the GPIO pins, camera, display, and everything's available, so it's a fantastic little case. But obviously we'll be doing some modifications to it shortly. Obviously your antenna, of course, your power cable, which obviously powers the hat. Obviously your 3D printed template for your drilling your holes in your case. Then obviously your header pin, which is actually from the Raspberry Pi to the going to the hat. Obviously your ferret, which is actually a clamp style, so which is obviously for your power supply, which obviously gets rid of some of the hum and some other noises which they've found in previous installations and previous builds. People have come across it's actually been fantastic using those. So but yeah, so otherwise you do get some hardware as well, which is your heatsink stick-on material, which actually sits between your Raspberry Pi and the case. So actually it's transfer of heat, which is an awesome idea, and screws in there as well. Obviously the Pi hat itself, and obviously as you can see, that's the Shari PiHat V, and that's your label you'll be using afterwards as well. And this is obviously the 818, which is the module, transceiver module, and yeah, very nice little unit. And yeah, we'll get into the soldering and other sides in a second. Your 3D printed part, which obviously goes between the two LEDs, so splits up the two lights, and that's your USB plug, which actually blanks it off one of the USB sockets on one of the Pis, which I believe is actually the bottom one, because you're actually using part of that USB connection that you're actually drawing the power from it. So they've decided to actually block that off so you don't sort of cause any harm. Other hardware obviously you'll need is obviously drills, center punch, obviously a drill itself. One thing I use a lot is actually your flux. I use it in a syringe sort of style, makes it easy to use, but basically flux is your friend. And obviously some other smaller drills which you'll be using shortly. And obviously solder, of course. And obviously soldering iron. I'm using a temperature controlled one, but anything will do with a fine tip. And obviously we'll go into that in a second once we get onto the soldering side of things. Okay, so first things first. So I'll switch over to the manual, and as you can see, that's pretty much what it looks like completed and already powered up, and when it's all finished. So that's obviously a completed hat when it's finished. This is obviously the PiHat U. PiHat V is going to be exactly the same, but obviously it's going to have a digital module. Okay, and that's your Nego case, and that's your link there, which you can go to and actually download other things, and obviously if you have any issues. But by all means you can ask me any questions as well. and that'll be no problems at all. And obviously they've had some release updates and stuff like that for different things. So yeah, so basically it's a pretty good construction manual, and you go through and it tells you obviously everything you get and all your details. And it says medium. It's not too bad. It's just the module itself is going to be the hardest part to print, to solder, sorry. But yeah, it's fairly easy, but we'll go through that as well. So alright, so back to the manual again. So the first thing, obviously, that's what comes in the kit. That's a close-up of it, shows you. And as you go down, obviously, what you need, which I've already just explained. And yeah, obviously, your drills. And now this is the first thing you actually have to do. So what I've done is using a hole punch. You're basically down the right way. Sorry, right. So basically, as it sits up like that, and making sure that it actually is sitting flush with the back of it, and all you're doing is actually using a hole punch in each hole, and which leaves you with, if you can see that coming out, okay, and that leaves holes in behind. So basically, when you flip it over, that's how your lid will be. So that'll obviously be your SMA for your antenna. That one, I believe, oops, is your PTT, and that one there will actually be your COS, and then comms, which is obviously it's making a connection, it's powered on. Yeah, so that's first things first. So I'll get rid of all this stuff out of the way. And first thing we'll do is get this out of the way as well. So that'll be the first thing to do. So on your holes, how they are there. So where you go in the manual, and obviously as you see, that's where it goes, and it tells you to make sure they're actually lined up here, where your two little red dots are, and obviously using a hole punch, make sure they're on there, and that's no worries at all. So first thing to do is actually you drill your holes out. They're using 1/8 or 1/16, sorry, and 932. I think it's 1.5, and you can get close to it in metric as well. But I happen to have the right size in imperial. So what I'll do, use the small one first, 1/16, to pre-drill all these holes. So I'll just grab my drill, sorry, and first drill bit. Okay. So let's pre-drill all 4 holes. One. So that's all of them. Right. So yeah. So basically, that's how your holes are when they're drilled. That's your first one, and then obviously going to your 932. It's going up to that one. So that's for your bigger hole, which is for your SMA connector. Okay, so for the bigger one, a bit of a shocking chuck this one, but you get the idea. Oh yeah, so you've got one hole like that. And next, what they actually suggest to do is when you have a look, obviously they've got all 4 holes. One, they actually ask you to remove a bit of the outside, so when you put the lock washer on, it actually digs into the bare metal, money for grinding, as they suggest here. If the connector is not electrically connected to the case at this point, you may hear a whine at about 1 kilohertz in the Shari PiHat audio. So you basically have to use either a larger size drill, or as I've actually got a almost like a reamer or a step drill, which will do basically exactly the same thing. Which basically, whoops, get that on the right screen, be good. And as you can see, it's made it shiny around there. So that's basically all you need, just to take a bit of the metal off. So that's that part done. Okay, so down to the next bit. So as you go down, now you're drilling into the other part of the case, which is the top, or part of the top. And as you can see, there's an X, which is actually where the 2 is. I've done the same thing using my center punch again. Probably can't really see it, or you probably just see it. You can see that little dimple there. I've already pre-punched it already. So now with that one, it's actually asking for you to use a 1/8 inch, which is roughly about 3 point something mil. But again, I've got a 1/8 drill bit, so I'll do that. Okay. Okay, and that's your hole drill, and that's where your wires go through, go from your Raspberry Pi to the hat. So your next bit, so that part's all done, as you can see. That's your hole. Okay, so now the PCB assembly. So as you'll see on here, so grab your bag with the PCB. Sticker, use that later. Okay. And that's your PCB board. So everything's basically on it, bar obviously your unit, and obviously your module. When you look at it, it generally can only go one way, because if you look at the configuration of it, you'll actually see that part there. You'll actually see the indentations at the back. They obviously match up with the top indentations up like that, so you'll actually only have parts that actually make contact, but do make sure you put it up the right way. But before you get too involved, always recheck your work. Now obviously onto the flux. What I tend to do with the flux is using a little bit of flux on each pad, and that just helps the flow of your solder. Now obviously they do say that your top pins, which is 8, 9 and 10, which is your top 3, they're actually all connected together. So there's not a big deal if you actually well, you don't make a short, but if you find you've actually got to shorten those pins, well, they actually are all connected. So yeah, so once you've done that, using the module, what I tend to do to actually keep it still, I normally use a bit of blue tack just to hold it still, and place the little unit on there, making sure it's in the center. So I usually have two bits, and just make sure they're actually even. So you have one there, one there, and again just always check just to make sure it's sitting in the one spot. And it's all nice and lined up. Okay, so now you've done that, you take some solder. You just start from one corner, usually do opposite corners, then you can take the blue tack off. So yeah, so you get into that. So what you want to try and do, as you can see in here, so each little connection, you can actually see it, it shows you here. By using the flux, what it helps as well is actually making sure you make a connection not only just on the base like it's got here, it's not making a connection right up the wall, so you're sort of getting like an angled connection, so on the bottom as well as up the side. So those ones are good, those ones actually are making a good connection, so you just got to make sure that it's actually connected properly as they show here. And yeah, so I usually start from one corner and then go on from there. So, and as they say here, basically those 1, 2, 3, 4, those ones there, they're actually all connected together. Now I believe pin 13, yeah, there's actually physically nothing connected to it, which is this one here. So anyway, as we go, so solder on. So by applying a bit of solder, just make sure you can see where it actually wicks up the side. Just make sure it wicks up the side. Okay, the opposite side. And just make sure it actually wicks up the side of it. You usually get used to it pretty quickly. It doesn't take much solder. The side. Now I can take the tack off. Bring this side. And you can actually see when you're soldering, it's actually it sort of runs straight up the side. It sort of does it pretty much for you. All you have to do is just feed solder to it, and it's all run through. So they're all good. Yeah. Change over to. Oops. Zoom. Okay, there you go. And you can see where it's sort of whipped up the side. And yeah, so yep, all good. So just go through and just make sure everything's all whipped up and everything is looking good. Okay, so on to the next bit. So keep on going down. So we've done all that. Next part is the little connector, which is in the bag. The cable. It's a small little connector. Okay, so zoom in for me. There you go. Yep, so that goes on the board. Like it shows you. And obviously facing the outside. And again, this is where your blue tack comes in handy again. So on there, flick them over. Shouldn't really need any flux for these, but that's it. Away. And that's okay. It's going to mess with my head now. Right, on to the next bit. Okay, so this part you actually have to install the Raspberry Pi. This is actually for the header. So grab your Raspberry Pi. Oops, don't need the SD card yet. So basically, you just want to sit it in there. So, I believe it tells you to install use your 4 screws. So this will be for the header. So grab your screws. Oops. Undo. Okay, so and these obviously, as I said, they're only going temporary. So I need 2, don't need 4. Okay, so just do these screws up. One there. One there. Well, it says 4 because there's only 2 you can use. The other ones, as you can probably see, are actually sitting on like little dimples. Just hold it in place. And those ones are for the case, which goes on later. So that's that plastic case. Okay, so back to instructions. So yeah, once you do that, flip it over. Using your header, put it over the Raspberry Pi. Set it down. As I see, it looks like that. And then using the image, sets over the top, so it lines up. Okay, so once you put that on there, just got to add another 2 screws. And just hold it in place. Hold it there. Just make sure everything's seated correctly. Oh yeah. So then you just go along and solder all the pins. So soldering all the pins there, that's your 2 screws there that you put in. And then basically once you do that, then you go to the SMA. So just for this one, I'll quickly go and do this and solder these little pins, and I'll be right back. Okay, so after it's all done, that's all the pins done. They're all good and done nice, yep. Okay, so back to the manual again. Okay, so while it's obviously in there, grab your SMA. Yeah. Okay. So I'll go back to video. So make sure it's just hard up against it. So where your connector is, it shows you in the picture anyway. Just make sure it's hard up against the board itself. It should sit fairly flat up against it. And then once you do that, obviously you put a little bit of solder on the little red square there, and center pin, and then obviously you can try sliding over, and it should be a perfect fit. The reason you only do the center pin, just in case you have to readjust it. So I'll just do the center pin. And try and get it fairly centered. I might have to use Bluetooth again. Be so if I couldn't Bluetooth as your friend. It really comes in handy with holding stuff still when you're soldering. 101 uses for Bluetooth. And that's soldered. Yep. Okay, so take that off. Be soldered, it is. And obviously just to check, obviously for fitment. Oops. access agreement. That is perfect. No worries at all. I can see the LEDs inside, so they're all actually lined up as well, but obviously we've got to put the spacer and everything on there yet. So, right, so now that's done. Again, finishing off by soldering the legs, 2 squares, making sure the center pin's obviously still connected, which it should be anyway. And obviously you take the hat out and then do the underneath pins as well, because obviously it's on the back of the SMA connector. It's like a fork which actually goes around the PCB. So yeah, so let's do that. So just quickly do this. A couple of jabs. Flux on there just to help with the ground pins. Oops. Connected. Connected. And take the screws out. And then remove, being careful when you pry them apart, just do one end by one end by one end and slowly work it out. That's it. So right. And yeah, so just go ahead and do the other two on the back. A bit of flux. Okay, good connection. Right. Onto the manual again, down the side. Okay, so that's where you put your little 3D printed part. So in the bag again. Put the USB thing in now or later, it's up to you. But that's your little 3D printed part with a little notch cut out. And that goes between these two LEDs, so that way you don't get like a multitude of colors when they're coming out. So that way it splits up the two LEDs inside. And once you put that in the case, that won't actually slide off. It should actually stay in position. Sorry. Okay, so that part's done. So take the Raspberry Pi back out. I'm going to put the thermal pad in. Okay, thermal pad. So as you can see, it goes across. Oops. The heatsink and the chip next to it. So just remove one of the plastic bits. Making sure I try not to touch anything. That way it may not stick correctly. And yeah, so what you end up with is basically like that. Check across it. Just make sure it's all connected down. And then peel off the other side. If you can, try not to touch it. Yeah, so once that part's done, you can basically put it back inside and put those 2 screws back in again. And they'll actually touch when you put them back in, and they actually touch these 2 pads here. So yeah, so back in there, so back in. Keep it positioned so it doesn't move around very much. Right, 2 screws back in. Make them snug, not over tight, because obviously you're going into aluminium. And that's it. Yep, put it back in there again, nice and firm. Okay, so go back and plug it back in again. Just making sure obviously the 3D printed stays in there. Actually, for now, I actually just take that 3D printed part by the looks of it, otherwise it'll probably end up falling off and losing it. So basically you put that back on again. So put the hat back on. 2 screws. The hole that's applicated. Oops. And again, as I said before, just make sure you don't over tighten. And aluminium, it has to be snug anyway. Oops. Okay, part's done. Okay, so you grab your wire, power cable. So your cable, and what you need to do, obviously plug, which is probably would have been easier while the hat was out, but anyway, you can see on the pin, you've got your 2 little pinholes in the end. It's actually one side's higher than the other, so if you look in the socket, they should marry up quite well. So it should only be able to go in one way. And then place it in there and click it into place. That's it. And then once you've done that, feed it down through your hole you drilled before. That comes through on the other side. So, like that. And then they should come through if you flip it over. And the whole idea is to actually go, it's probably better in the photo, that actually doesn't really show you properly, but there's 2 little pads at the back here. So when you look at the manual, you'll see the little pads here which are directly behind the 2 little units there. I think it's marked, I think TP6 and TP10. There you go. Yeah, so TP10, TP6. So what I would probably do is actually pre-tin first the pads. I mean, the things should already be tinned on the actual leads. So a little bit of solder on the two pads on the Pi. So, oops. So little pads there, just pre-tend it. Just add a little bit of ball of solder to it. So if that's all right, so black should go to TP6. Not too sure if these things are actually pre-tinned or not. Anyway, we're on the side of caution. I'll pre-tin them anyway. That's it. What I'll do as well is the cutters. Make them a little bit shorter because the little leads are a little bit long. I don't want them touching any other pad except for TP6 and TP10. Oops. And TP10. So they were on there. Solid on there, okay. No problems, nothing touching anything else. Okay, so, and using a hot glue gun, which I'm just using a cordless one, what you need to do is actually then mark it, and what they suggest you do is actually use a bit of hot glue here and here just to stop them from flapping about. Then yeah, so I'll do that part, and yeah, so do that, and then move on to the next bit. Okay, so I'll just wait for my just take it down my lip so it's actually in an open sort of area. Gun off. Try and help it speed up a bit. So yeah, so that's where that was all tucked away, out of the way between the pins, so it's not going to actually puncture anything. So there's no problems there. Okay, so, and then temporarily remove the two screws from underneath. And grab the other two which are remaining. The bottom one. So you'll have in there as well a little, I believe you've got little feet which go on the bottom of this plastic cover. So yeah, so back to that. So you've got rubber feet that go under here. That's a little pad that comes in the pack as well. You can put them on later. So yeah, so once you take those two screws out, fits on there fairly good. So nothing should be in the way, which it's not. Right, so zoom back in. Again, not over tight. On. And goes in the back. Right. So on to next one. And whatever goes on the outside. It's on there. So cover goes back on again. Oops. 3D printed part. Can't forget that. And it goes over and tightens up tight. You grab your washer and lock washer. Oops. Goes on. Oops. Back to front misjoined. Oh yeah. That goes on there. Antenna. Yeah. So your cover goes on, your nut, your serrated washer goes on there, antenna. You see. See, it's all lit in there. And then you supply your sticker, which is in IS3B. It's not in the center, but I was sort of trying to line them up with the LEDs. But yeah, so that's it there. And then obviously the last thing to do is basically install your ferrite onto your power supply, which I've already done that with all mine. And then obviously your little USB plug goes into the bottom. So goes in there, like that. So yeah, and yeah, then so install that, and then that's basically it. So, and hopefully yours finishes up ending looking like this, or something thereof. So yeah, your connections there, or USB, and that's all done. So, right, yeah. So that's it for the first part of this series of videos. And no worries, so come back for the next one where I'll start looking at doing the software and getting it all loaded up and ready. So no worries, 73s, and thanks for watching. Thank you.